Ladies and gentlemen, it's my distinct pleasure today to introduce our guest speaker, Mr. Dennis Strigl. He's the former President and Chief Operating Officer of Verizon Communications, which at the time of his retirement in December 2009 had operating revenues totaling over $107 billion. Mr. Strigl was responsible for the operation of Verizon's network businesses, which included Verizon Wireless, Verizon Telecom, and Verizon Business, as well as Verizon's Services Operations, which provides financial, real estate, and other functional services to all the corporation's operations. Immediately prior to that, he served as President and CEO of Verizon Wireless. Mr. Strigl served in the communications industry for more than 40 years. He is widely recognized as one of the most prominent architects of the wireless communications industry. He was responsible for bringing together the domestic wireless operations of Bell Atlantic, AirTouch, and ZTE to form Verizon Wireless, now one of the top performing companies in the industry. As president of Ameritech Mobile Communications, he was instrumental in launching the nation's first cellular telephone network in Chicago and received the Cellular Industry Achievement Award for engineering advancement and pioneering in marketing programs. Rising through the ranks, he held positions such as the Vice President of American Bell Incorporated, the Chief Operating Officer of New Jersey Bell, the President and CEO of Bell Atlantic Mobile, and then the President and CEO of Bell Atlantic Mobile when it merged with NYNEX Mobile. Mr. Strigl is past chairman of the board of directors of the Cellular, Telecommunications, and Internet Association. He serves on the board of directors of several companies and financial firms. He has also served as the chairman of the board of trustees of Canisius College, where he earned his undergraduate degree in business administration and a doctorate in humane letters. He also holds an MBA from Farley Dickinson University in Rutherford, New Jersey, which named him to its Pinnacle Society for Distinguished Alumni. Mr. Strigl is an avid pilot, earning his commercial pilot's license at the age of 19. He may tell you how he originally started to go down that path and realized there wasn't a lot of money in the industry back then, so he ended up in the wireless, and I think it did okay for himself. In addition to being a frequent guest on the Fox News Channel, Fox Business, CNBC, and MSNBC, he recently authored the book, Managers, Can You Hear Me Now? Hard-hitting lessons on how to get real results, and has spoken to numerous groups on management leadership. At the end of today's lecture, he's graciously offered to have a book signing out in the atrium. Hopefully you'll take advantage of this opportunity. This is a great resource for your professional libraries. And at the end of this talk, when we open this up for Q&A, I have an added benefit for you guys. The first 10 quality questions. Quality. All right? See me afterwards, you get a free book. And Mr. Strigl will sign it for you afterwards. How's that for driver? Again, a warm welcome today to Mr. Dennis Strigl.
Hello everyone, how are you? You know, every time I come to this campus, I'm amazed at the beauty of this place. It truly is a beautiful, beautiful campus. I know you all worked hard to get here, and you work hard while you're here, but I have to tell you, you're very fortunate folks together. So, as Dale said very kindly, I have written a book. It's called Managers, Can You Hear Me Now? And as we thought about what do we call this book, you'll recall the test man advertising that Verizon used with the guy with the horn-rimmed glasses who went all over the United States. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? It is one of the most successful ad campaigns that we've ever had here in the United States. Very, very well received. So why write a book? After 42 years in the business world, I decided that there were things that we don't learn necessarily in our university environment that we've done, by the way, maybe Notre Dame accepted me. And there are things that you don't learn in management seminars. And I thought that it would be useful to put some of those things down on paper. So let me begin the way the book begins with the reason managers fail at their jobs. the reasons they don't advance in the ranks of their companies. And in the book, I describe about 9 of these reasons. I won't take you through these 9 reasons, but what I would like to do is tell you about 3 of the more prominent reasons managers are not successful. Number 1, they focus on the wrong things. And when you think about all of the things that you can focus on in the business world, there are only 4 things that are important. They are to grow revenue, to get new customers, to keep the customers that you already have, or to cut costs. And for top managers within a company, they need to focus on all 4 of those things. But in the course of any business day, managers find that it's very difficult to focus on those things because of the many distractions that they face. And I'll talk about some of those in just a minute. But the second biggest reason managers fail is because they attempt to befriend the people that they work with. Somewhere along the way, they learn that making people happy is what a manager should do. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm here to tell you that making your employees happy will not make your company successful. And I've always thought of it the other way around, that happy employees work for successful companies. And once the employees see that the results that they're bringing in are in fact important to the company, then they are happy in the jobs that they have, most employees anyway. They like to be successful. So the manager's job is not to make them happy. The manager's job is to have them produce results that in turn will make them happy. And the third most prominent reason managers fail, and perhaps you can understand this, is that they get hung up on themselves. And when I think about it, being a manager is a pretty heady job. It is the manager who gets to ride in the back seat of a limousine or stay at a hotel or hop on an airplane to travel across the country. By the way, after you've done it 3 or 4 times, you don't want to do it anymore. The fact of the matter is that being a manager can be a very heavy job, and many people throughout my career that became managers, I saw their own demise when they got hung up on taking people to lunch or accepting luncheon invitations, playing golf for an afternoon, or going out for drinks or dinner after work. And I've always told the people who I work with, none of that is important. What is important are those 4 things that I mentioned a moment ago. So, having pointed to the 3 reasons, most prominent reasons managers fail, let me tell you what my thoughts are on what it takes to be successful within the business world, what it takes to be a successful business manager. And I hope that the first thing I say here will come as no surprise to people here at Notre Dame. But the most important thing a manager can do is operate with integrity. Now, in the business world, we have codes of conduct. We have very pointed things that say, here's how you need to operate in this business. Here's our code. I'm not talking about that. Of course, managers need to live within a company's ethical boundaries. What I'm talking about is something that is much harder to do from time to time, from day to day, from month to month. And that is to do the right thing consistently. Now, what is doing the right thing? Doing the right thing is something that people watch you do as a manager. And I will tell you that in the business world, you will be tempted to take shortcuts, whether it is on simple things like an expense account, or whether it is on preparation of the financials for a business. From time to time, managers are tempted. You know this. You see the number of managers who end up in serious hot water. What I'm talking about in terms of doing the right thing is very simply this: doing the right thing even when no one is looking. And I have always said to my managers that that is integrity. Making sure that even when no one is looking, that you do the right thing. So integrity in my book is more than honesty. For example, I can be honest when I say, yes, I stole the money in the vault. But how much integrity does that show? None. The most important tool you have as a manager in the business world is the shadow that you cast. Many years ago, I attended a seminar, and it focused on what we called the shadow of the leader. And it was a lesson that stuck with me throughout the remainder of my career. As a boss, people listen to you. As a boss, people watch you. And they get much more out of watching you than they do listening to you. What you say is important, but it's what you do that truly matters. And I have learned that the way to have a successful company, organization, group within a company is to cast across your employees a positive shadow. They want to do what you do. They want to do the right thing, and the way to show them that is with the shadow that you cast. Now, another very important thing that I've learned throughout business is the importance of simplicity. What do I mean by that? Many years ago, I was on a project in our company headquarters. I was working for New York Telephone at the time, and I was asked to write a report on how we telemarket in our company. You know, Danny, how do you improve on telemarketing? And I remember being very frustrated in this short-staffed position that I had because no one was interested in what I was trying to convey. And one day I happened to ride an elevator with my boss's 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 boss. Now this is like the Navy deal, right? As a young fledgling, particularly in a telephone company or the military, you don't talk to someone that high in the organization without going through the proper chain of command. But I thought, I can get nobody interested in this project that I'm devoting my waking hours to. And so I rode the elevator one day with Mr. Clark. And I said, Mr. Clark, I have a wonderful idea on how to better telemarket our products. And Mr. Clark looked at me and he said, put it on paper and give it to me. For the next week, I spent my time putting my thoughts on paper. And I wrote a 17-page paper on how to better telemarket our products. Now, hopefully, this isn't like a Notre Dame term paper, right? But the fact of the matter is, I was so proud of this document that I put together. I took it up to Mr. Clark's office. I gave it to his assistant, and I went back down to my little cubicle, very self-satisfied. Within 10 minutes, his assistant came back down to my cubicle and handed me back my paper. Through the front page of this paper was a line, and it said, Mr. Strigl, net this out. I was dumbfounded. I was so hurt by this that I jumped on the elevator, went back up to Mr. Clark's office, and he was sitting in on the telephone, and I said, I have to see Mr. Clark, I have to see him. Hung up the telephone, and he waved me in. And I said, Mr. Clark, I don't understand. What does this mean? Net this out. He said, young man, I'm going to give you a lesson that I hope will stick with you through your entire career. And it did. He said, if you can't say something on one half of one side of one sheet of paper, no one's going to read it. Worse yet, no one's going to understand it. And he said, if you can do that, it means you've thought through what you're trying to convey. It stuck with me forever. And I always used to tell my people, baffling to them, was, I'm not going to read your term paper. I'm not going to read anything that can't be said in one half or one side of one sheet of paper. Now, by the way, that's an exaggeration. I understand that not everything can be said in that amount of space. But when you operate in the business world, or in college for that matter, with the concept in mind that you must net things out to be clear, concise, and therefore to be understood, it's a huge lesson. And what do we learn? We learn that a paper has to be X number of pages or X number of words. In the spoken area, we learn that your speech should be 10 minutes long, 15 minutes long. And my thought on all of that is, if you're told to do it, here at Notre Dame, of course, do it. But in the business world, being concise is the most important. Being clear and concise is the most important thing you need to do to get people to do things for you, to get the job done. So, throughout the course of any business day, there are a number of distractions that managers face. And let me ask you, what do you think the number one distraction is? Come on, it's Notre Dame. College football. Maybe here it is, college football. Right? It's email. And so, for example, how many of you here have looked at your email today? Did anybody not look at your email today? Good. Okay. So the number one distraction in the business world is email. And there are so many managers that come to work, they sit in front of their computer terminal, and they never leave their office except for a brief break here and there and perhaps lunch. And I always told my managers this is not the way to manage. And as I think about it, managers would sit waiting to respond to someone else's email, or how come nobody responded to my email, or composing email. And I always said to the people I work with, it's nonsense. And in fact, I got in the habit of telling people, I'm not going to respond to your email unless it's yes, no, or come see you. And I did that for years. And what you get with face-to-face communications anywhere, not only in the business world, is so much more meaningful than what you get in your email. So my book contains a bunch of rules for use of email. I probably have had more comments on those rules than any other part of the book. But I think there are some rules to think about, perhaps a little bit about. The second biggest distraction in the business world happens to be text messaging. How many of you have text messaged today? All right. I'd like to tell you a story about text messaging. This is the story of a dumb CEO. So about 7 years ago, I was just telling Professor Mullen this story a short time ago. About 7 years ago, 8 years ago perhaps, I had my chief engineer come to me with Lucent Alcatel, now Lucent Alcatel, and they presented a brilliant idea. They said, Denny, we want you to invest in a product that we're developing that will put words over your telephone. I said, I don't understand. What is this? They said it's SMS, short messaging service. I said, it doesn't sound like anything I'd want to invest in. And they said, it's just putting words over your phone. And I said, no, phones are for voice communications. Nothing else. I call you, you call me, you leave a voicemail, I check my voicemail. Who's going to read words over a telephone? About a year from that day that they tried to convince me to invest in short messaging service, They came to me and said, we did this anyway without your help, without your investment. And would you try it? Would you see if you can get some interest in this? I said, okay, it's free, why not? Thus was the beginning in Verizon and in the industry at large of what is today text messaging. And I remember on that very first day, I sent a text message to each of the people who reported to me, to my vice presidents. And the text message was very simple. I said, when you get this, give me a call. How many calls did I get? None. None. Which prompted me to go to the door of every one of their offices, and I said, I'm going to send you a text message every day. I want you to respond. And I said, I'm going to send a text message to the people who work for you, and I want them to respond. Well, by the way, the next text message I sent out, I got a response. But the fact of the matter is that for the first year, I would go around to Verizon locations, have meetings with our employees, and ask how many of you text message today. Very few hands would go up at first. But by the end of the year, almost every hand in the room would go up. And it was my opinion that unless I could convince my own employees to text message, no one was going to sell text messaging to our customers. And it became the phenomenon that it is today. Today there are over 3 trillion text messages sent in the United States. I have 5 children. I think they send a trillion of them. I could go on and on about creating a culture, the importance of creating a culture, but I think what I prefer to do is to stop and talk about whatever you'd like to talk about. What questions do you have for an old business guy? Yes, sir.
For those of you that are kind of quiet, many of you, please use the microphone.
So kind of along the same lines, could you talk a little bit about the iPhone? And I'm sure that you guys were going to present the opportunity, so what you're thinking there. And also, can you talk about the future of the industry where profits are going to be based more on hardware or more software?
I missed the last part.
For profits in the industry, is it going to be more hardware, software, kind of given the consolidation of players? And it seems like I covered TMT this summer. It seems like it's a very
okay, Android, iPhone, and all that
yeah.
kind of stuff. Yeah. Okay, so I'll tell you another story about the iPhone. If you look up Denny Strigl on the internet, one of the articles you will see is that I'm the guy who refused the iPhone. So I'll tell you a little story about it that may be of interest to you. Oh gosh, I guess it's in the early 2002, 2003. Steve Jobs called me, and Steve said, Denny, I have a phone that I'm thinking about. And I remember saying to him, I said, what? You're into computers. What do you want to get into a phone for? And at the time, they had just introduced the iPod. And he said, well, I want to put music over this phone. And I also want to do some things with voicemail. Can I come see you? Okay, Steve Jobs, what do you say? Of course you can come see me. So Steve came to my office in New York. And he said, I have this concept. He said, I'm going to make something that is a phone that it'll have visual voicemail and it'll have iPod music on it. I said, Steve, that's crazy. What? I mean, why? You've got the iPod. You know, it's a wonderful device. I have it. My kids have it. He said, no. He said, I have to make a phone. And I said, good luck to you. I don't think you're going to be able to do it. He said, can we meet in 3 months? He said, come out to Cupertino. I said, okay. 3 months, I went out to Cupertino. Steve still has nothing physical in the way of hardware. So he said, let's get together another 3 months, and another 3 months. And this went on for 2 years. And at the last meeting I had with Steve on the iPhone subject, I said, Steve, you're putting me on here. You know, I said, I want to know what the commercial terms are. What do I pay you to buy it? What do you pay me for the traffic that goes over? What do we call it? At the time, everything we had was the Verizon name was on it. And he said, Denny, he said, I just keep talking to him. A couple months went by, not to prolong the agony here, but he called me one day, and this was a Saturday afternoon, and he said, I have a confession to make. He said, I've been stringing you on for the last 2.5 years. He said, I think I'm going to do business with AT&T. I said, okay. I said, why? He said, well, they have a technology called GSM. And it's used around the world, except it's not used prominently in the Far East and a couple of other places. The system that I have is CDMA. And he said, if I build a GSM phone, I have 8 times the opportunity to sell them than I do a CDMA phone. And I said, okay, I got it. Thanks for admitting this, that you've been stringing me on here. I said, I assume you're negotiating with AT&T. He said, yes, I am. I said, do me one favor. Every time you talk to me, tell AT&T you're talking to me. I said, don't tell them what you just told me. He said, okay. So I may have been the guy who refused to quote the first iPhone, but I'm also the guy that drove AT&T's price up to a point where they couldn't make any money. and of course now AT&T and Verizon and Sprint have the iPhone, and I proudly carry the iPhone 5 myself. The software, I'm not sure I can give you a detailed answer, but I will tell you that from a Verizon perspective, because of the relationship we had on the initial iPhone, we thought it was very important to develop with Google the Android technology. By the way, I say develop with them. They developed it. We gave input to do it. And I think it's one of the best decisions that we made was to try to broaden the software technology platform through Android, working also with Microsoft. And as you've seen, Microsoft now has their own platform. But if you look at what the wireless companies have been able to do with a broad base, they can continue to add more customers quarter after quarter after quarter. Whereas AT&T recently not, and by the way, I worked for AT&T in my career too, I don't mean to dig them. But because they were so committed to the iPhone platform, their sales results are much more depressed, at least in the last quarter, because of iPhone 5 shortages. Whereas other companies who have diversified are much, much better capable. Thank you for your question. Yes, sir.
If you could go back to when you were first appointed CEO, what would you do differently?
Well, you know, for a long-term CEO, I could probably spend the rest of the day telling you what I might have done differently. I think that the most important thing for me is I would have recognized sooner the importance of what I call cobbling together a nationwide footprint. So, you know, those of you who've had cell phones for a while, you've probably had them since you're about 10 years old, you may recall that in the early days of the wireless industry, there were things called roaming charges, right? I mean, you would go from South Bend to Indianapolis, and you would pay a $3 a day charge and 50 cents a minute or $1 a minute. I didn't realize soon enough of the importance of building a nationwide footprint that you could get rid of those roaming charges, and that you could also take, the marketing term, I guess, advantage of your customers on your own system. So in 1991, about 10 years into the wireless industry, I realized that you had to have a nationwide footprint. And those who didn't would get gobbled up by other carriers. Those that did would survive. And my strategy became, 10 years into the game, building a nationwide footprint and being the acquirer rather than the acquirer. So I wish I would have arrived at that conclusion sooner. Because today, you don't even think about it. You know, now another issue that I had was I didn't think that people would use their phones internationally as much. And therefore, I was slow to adopt to CDMA technology in Europe, for example. And in the business community, most Fortune 500 companies, they spend a fair amount of time, at least in Europe, if not elsewhere around the world. Thank you for your question. Yes, sir.
What do you think the SoftBank acquisition of Sprint will do to the industry?
Well, a much needed infusion of cash for Sprint. Okay, recently, one of your alumni is the CEO of Sprint, Dan Hessen, who's just a wonderful guy. I think the biggest thing is it gives Sprint more opportunity. So I know that what they had to do was strike the deal on the iPhone that they did, and of course the financial analyst community was down on them for the price that they paid for the iPhone. But I think they had to do that. They also have to get more spectrum, and maybe this puts them in a position, should the government approve and then the deal go through, I think it just gives them much needed capital to continue to survive, invest in the business, and perhaps at some point to do a merger with T-Mobile. It's what they need to, not necessarily T-Mobile, but they definitely need to grow from a wireless spectrum point of view, and they need to be less bashful about growing organically. And the lack of cash causes you to think twice about spending any money. So I hope it goes through for you. Yes, sir.
More from a management practices point of view, what did you learn about like hiring and firing and finding the right people? Could you expand a little bit on that?
Sure. So my philosophy has always been the people you hire are what make you a success. The people that you groom, that you train, are what make you a success. Firing people, well, I've done my share of it throughout my career. It's a very hard thing to do, as you might imagine. And I've always been very careful at the people I select in the very beginning. And if you do that, and you bring people along, and you trust people to perform, you give them a task, you leave them alone. And I write quite a bit about this in my book. They can rise to the challenge. I believe that the philosophy I've always had is I trust the people that work for me until they prove that my trust is no longer deserved. And incidentally, that's a big road. But you can violate that trust. And when you do, it's always been my opinion that we need to sever our relationship. So one of the things, I talked very briefly about the importance of integrity. But one of the things I tell people who work with me on day one is you must be honest with me at all times. And that honesty, even on small things, is very important to me. Because if I find that you're not being honest, if I find so much as a fib, then I wonder, can I trust you? So, in the business world, you see a lot of fibs. Whenever I saw a fib, and I'll give you an example, here's what I would do. So, John would come to me, hypothetically, John would come to me and say, I've not been able to complete the assignment that you gave me on time. What's the manager's first question? Why not? Mary didn't give me the information that I needed to, broaden the answer that I'm trying to give you. Well, Mary didn't give you it, but so it wasn't John, it wasn't you, it was Mary. Yeah, I'll go ask Mary. see if I can hurry it up. No, stay right where you are. Let's call Mary. Whenever I would say, let's put the two of you together, nine times out of 10, I would get the response, I'll take care of it. And I would be very candid. I'd say, you ever lie to me again, we're done. It's that simple. So I think it's important to trust people. I think it's important that people keep the trust. I think this idea of my concept and the importance of integrity is something I've tried to build throughout my entire, not just people who work for me, but my entire company. My success is dependent upon my ability to trust them. One further thing that I write a little bit and talk about, all too often, a manager throws people under the bus. And perhaps it's a flaw of mine, but I always wanted, perhaps too long, to work with a manager that wasn't successful. And I think when you hire someone and you devote the time and attention that you do, and translate it into dollars that you put into a person, I think you need to give them more than a fair shake. And if it doesn't work in the position that you have them in, to move them to another position before you throw them out the door. And I would say that that's, in general, that's not the case in the business world. Too many times, managers arrive too early at the conclusion that I must throw this person off of the bus. I don't believe in that. I had just one story to illustrate. When I first came to Bell Atlantic Mobile, my HR vice president came to me and said, we have a young man in customer service that is not making it. He's not cutting it. I just want to let you know, it was a small company at the time, I want to let you know, Danny, I have to terminate this guy. I said, well, before you terminate him, let me talk to him. So in comes this kid, just bustling with energy. His name was Mark Montaigne. And I said, what's happening? He said, I can't focus. I've been dyslexic, he said, my whole life. And I'm in customer service, I can't focus on talking on the phone, working the computer, and trying to think about what I say next. Okay, I said, were you smart in college? He said, yeah. I said, I got good grades. He had a master's degree. I said, what's your degree in? He said, physical fitness, or whatever it was called. And, I said, you mean like a gym teacher? He said, yeah. He said, that's what I wanted to be, a gym teacher, but I couldn't get a job teaching. I said, okay. I said, what would you like to do here? He said, I'd like to open up a gym for you. Now, I'm thinking about, okay, I'm going to pay for this gym. I said, you know what, Mark? Go ahead. I said, do it. And by the way, he had explained that, your attendance will be better, people will have more energy on the job, we'll focus on getting people to eat right, so it became a health and wellness center. Okay, so roll ahead 20 years or whatever it is. We now call him Coach Mark. He has 52 fitness centers across the country that report to him. And what he told me conceptually about health and about morale was right. And I'm very happy we didn't throw him under the bus. Yes, sir.
Dean East mentioned that you're on several boards of directors. What's the difference between being an effective manager and an effective director?
I am on 3 boards of directors. PNC Financial Services, with CEOs of Bradford of Notre Dame. Anna Digits, which is a semiconductor manufacturer. great company, small company. They build chips for cell phones. And I also have the distinct pleasure of being the director of Eastman Kodak. Some of you may know Eastman Kodak is in Chapter 11. Okay, so in each of those boards, it takes a different kind of director to contribute to the success of the company. A manager, from my perspective, is a very hands-on individual. You, as the CEO, you must roll up your sleeves, get out in the field, in your shops or whatever it may be, in your call centers, and make sure you understand what people are doing, what problems they're having, and helping them with the challenges. A director is very different. A director is not someone who steps down into the company. It's not someone who gets involved in operations, but rather it is someone who gives advice on what the director thinks is needed to make the company a success. Directors are at probably a 40,000-foot level, unless you get in trouble, unless the company is in trouble. Then directors want to be in the, and that's where you don't want directors. A director's job really is to steer the company, to be strategic in its thinking, and to provide, in quotes, oversight on the part of the, you represent the shareholders, you represent the shareholders' interest in the company. So it's a very different way of operating, way of contributing. Yes, sir.
Could you talk about how you got into the telecommunications industry and what separates Verizon from the rest of the group?
Yeah, they'll talk a little bit about my entry into the communications world. You know, I never wanted to be a manager. I got out of the Army, I was a pilot. And I was hired by American Airlines. And I had a date, I went through the physical with all the testing, and I had a date to report to training in Fort Worth, Texas. And a friend of mine said, before you go to this job, why don't you just walk, I lived in Buffalo, New York, why don't you walk up and down Main Street and see what companies are paying? I thought, well, that's a good idea. Young guy, 22 years old, I was married at the time and had one child already. So the airline paid $350 a month for the first year. And the job was, for the first year, it was a union job, and you would sit home and wait for the phone to ring when someone called in sick, and then you went in and you worked as a flight engineer. You didn't have the yoke in front of you, you didn't have the throttle in front of you, you had maps, you know. And I thought, well, $350, okay. The second year, if you did well, you could be a first officer, hands on the controls, and make $416. I walked up and down Main Street in Buffalo, New York, put my applications into banks, the water company, the gas company, and the telephone company. The telephone company called me in 2 days and said, we'll pay you twice what you're making for the airlines. I didn't have a choice. You know, it's funny how your career develops if you let it. You know, and I think there are several keys to, and maybe this answers the second part of the question. If it doesn't, ask it again, stop it. I never in my 42 years asked for a job. There were jobs that I said I don't like, but I never said I want another one. And the key to advancing in a career in concept is this. I'll give you maybe 4, 5, 6 points. Always do more than you are asked to do. Now, make sure you can do it, but always do more, ask for more than what you're being asked to do. Secondly, be accountable. Do what you're told to do, what you say you will do. Do it completely and on time. Be totally accountable for what you do. Number 3, I've already mentioned this, never, ever, ever fib about anything. Number 4, this is a tough one to understand, but I'll tell you anyway. Make the boss better. Make your boss better than what he or she wants to be. Crazy, right? I mean, why do you want to make your boss better than what they want to be? I always thought that the biggest responsibility I have, in addition to doing the right thing, is to make my boss look good. Because if the boss looks good, the boss will remember that, remember how I helped the boss look good, and eventually I'll be rewarded for that. Also, never to partake in corporate politics. It's hard not to from time to time. And what do I mean by that? Well, corporate politics is a lot of innuendo. It's a lot of, hey, she didn't do her job, or he didn't do his job. Or, did you see what he did? I never did that in my career. In fact, I remember walking out of situations where people would want to talk about how Charlie wasn't doing the job. I consistently turned around and walked out. Because I've always had the philosophy that what goes around comes around. My mother always said, if you have nothing nice to say about someone, say nothing. And I think that's an important lesson in corporate politics. Don't play corporate politics. And finally, I think it's very important to be loyal. And by the way, if you're out looking for another job, okay, but only do that after you've made the decision that I must leave. Because loyalty goes a long way. What else? Yes, sir.
With the role of the cell phone going from starting out as being able to make a phone call from anywhere, not being tied down to a cordless phone, to today basically having a lot of features like a handheld computer, where would you see the role of the cell phone going, evolving within the next decade? Just in any detail you'd be able to provide.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. Not that I haven't thought about this. And by the way, this is a question that always gets asked. Right? It's usually, where do you see the cell phone 30 years from now? I'm 66 years old. I don't care. I think, first of all, you'll continue to see more and more applications over cell phones. That's a given. You know that you'll be able to buy things. It'll be your credit card in the future, right? They're figuring if security issues can get, straightened away. But beyond that, I'm not sure. I'm not sure where it goes. I mean, at one point, we tried to put TV over your cell phone. We had mobile, I forget what we call it, mobile TV. And it's too small a screen. Although you do a lot of applications, games over cell phones. I think it's more of the same. I think the industry continues to consolidate. I mentioned Sprint, T-Mobile. There's probably more of that. There's, T-Mobile, Metro, PCS. There'll continue to be consolidation. What is key for the wireless industry is less government regulation. So, for example, AT&T tried to buy T-Mobile. For no reason at all that I can understand, the government said no. This United States of America has such stringent antitrust laws that there could not be collusion, or if there was, people get in very big trouble as a result. There could not be price fixing. If there was, there's ways to resolve the issue. Why they didn't let that go through is beyond me. And so, less regulation is, probably, you know, it's not only the wireless industry, it's throughout the country. Anything else? Yes, sir.
What would you say the single most important decision or habit that you've had in the past has led to such a successful career? Besides walking down Main Street.
Besides walking down Main Street, Buffalo. I think it relates to the rules that I just mentioned on how to, what to do in business. I mean, you know, I'm back to the no fibs. I don't know. I mean, I think there's something else that's probably served me well in my career. This may not be what you want to do. I am impatient as hell. You know, I cannot sit still. And it's always caused me to be very inquisitive. And one of the things I use to judge people on who moves ahead in the business is those who ask a lot of questions. Being inquisitive, I think, is part of why I move ahead. Probably because managers got tired of trying to answer my questions, you know. What else? Yes, ma'am.
Pure curiosity, what is your telemarketing idea
I don't even remember what it was. Probably not. You know, at the time, this was like 1970, right? So there was nothing to telemarket. I'll have to admit to you, you know, it was a monopoly. You know, so if I called you and said, you want a trim line telephone, I didn't care whether you said yes or no. We were still going to make the same amount of money, and so was I. But so I don't even remember. I had grand ideas, as I recall, about, you know, how to build a telemarketing group and, you know, what products the group would sell. And it was all nonsense in retrospect. Working for a monopoly is, you know, that's a challenge unto itself. And my liberation, if you will, was when the Bell system was split up in 1983. It was the best thing that ever, it was the best thing that ever happened to me. Because up until that time, all you did was salute. You know, it was, you took orders and you know, you saluted. And then my inquisitiveness, it was actually somebody paid attention. Thanks for your question. Yes, sir.
You mentioned avoiding getting involved in corporate politics, but with the election coming up and a lot of businessmen like Donald Trump and the Koch brothers getting involved in super PACs, coming out with political statements, what would your recommendation be as we move into the business world with making political statements and making donations?
I would never make a political statement. And I would advise you to donate to who you want to donate to. If you watch Fox or CNBC, you know my political views. They're all, by the way, they're all around less regulation and getting the economy working again. But I don't think PACs. I mean, they're important, and you know, when you're a high enough level within a company, you have to in some way contribute. But I never wanted to be part of deciding how the PAC funds got distributed. I don't care, Democrat, Republican, liberal, conservative. The question for a business executive is, who can help move this economy and this company into a better position? So, I mean, our PAC gave to a lot of politicians of all sizes and varieties. But my advice to you would be, try your best to avoid ever making the decision of choosing between one, the other, or another. Because oftentimes, you know, you give to one politician and then you have to ask his enemy for a favor. And they know. Is that it? Yes, ma'am.
So, in the industry of telecommunication, where the new technologies are improving all the time,
sorry, I missed part of the question.
Oh, okay. So like in the telecommunication this industry, the new technologies are always moving. So how important do you think a tech background is to the management side?
Okay, good question. It's important. The tech background is, by the way, I don't mean you have to be an electrical engineer. But my major my bachelor's degree is in management, business degree. But one of the things I've been recognized for, Dale mentioned it, is starting up a wireless company. And I remember when I was asked to run Ameritech Mobile, my boss said, the key here is to market. No, it wasn't. The key was service didn't work. You know, the key was the technology wasn't there. People would get cut off, they would get busy signals. So you have to invest yourself in technology. You have to know what the technology is, how it works. You don't have to know how to build it to be a business executive, but you certainly have to understand it. I think it's very important. Yeah, Steve Jobs never would have asked me a thing about his iPhone if he didn't know that I knew he knew technology. Okay? Well, thank you all so much.